AI models are powerful tools, but in order to use them properly and securely, you need to control them using an API. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to write a very simple Python API to control access to an LLM or an AI model. Now first, I want to explain why you actually need to do this so you understand the security and the importance of setting this up. Now let's say that you want to use an LLM, something like ChatGPT or something like DeepSeek, right? If that's the case, what you're probably going to do is you're either going to attempt to run this locally or you're going to use the cloud provider. So you're going to go to DeepSeek or OpenAI, you're going to generate an API key, and then you're going to take that API key, and that's what you send anytime you want to make a request or use the LLM. Now this is great and it works well if you're doing this locally, but in a production environment, if you were to take this API key and you were to use it directly from your own front end, so something like a website or a mobile application, you'd be introducing a huge security risk. The reason why that's the case is because if you use one of these keys from your front end, then anyone who has access to your front end code will be able to see and use that key. So they could really take advantage of that and they could send all kinds of requests and cost you a ton of money. Because anytime you send a request to something like a cloud provider, well, it costs you money. And even if you're running this locally on your own computer, it costs you compute time or resources. So the main idea here is that you only want to invoke an LLM, especially if it's coming from a provider like OpenAI, from something that's secure, something that you control, which would be a backend server or an API. The basic flow would be if someone has access to your front-end application, they would then send a request to your own backend. From your backend, you could then control whether or not you wanted to send a request to the LLM, so you can control roughly how much it will cost and which of your users are allowed to use the LLM. This is common practice from all of the AI applications that you've used before, and you'll typically notice that you get something like credits. So maybe you have 10 credits where you're able to call an LLM 10 times, and then after that you would need to pay money to this service provider to compensate them for how much the LLM is costing. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but the basic idea here is that we need to be able to control the calls to our LLM so that we can decide which users can call it or not call it and make sure that it doesn't cost us too much money. So with that in mind, let's get into it and start building this out. So like I mentioned, you can control access to any LLM that you want, and you can use something like OpenAI or DeepSeek. But in my case, I'm just going to run an LLM locally on my own computer using something called Ollama. This is completely free, it's open source, and it lets you run models on your own machine, assuming you have good enough hardware. I have an entire video on how to set this up, so I'll leave it on screen, but I'll give you the cliff notes here. What you need to do is simply download Ollama if you want to set this up on your own computer. So once you've downloaded and installed this, you can open up a terminal or a command prompt, and inside of here, you can just type Ollama to make sure this is working. If for some reason the command isn't recognized, you can try running Ollama by just typing the name of the application if you're on something like Windows and double-clicking it to run. Now, once Ollama is working, you can pull an Ollama model that you want to run locally. Now, to do that, you type Ollama, pull, and then you put the name of the model. In this case, I'll use a model like Mistral, but you can use models like Llama 3 and any open source model really you want. You can pull it and run it locally, assuming you have sufficient hardware, and all of the hardware requirements are specified on the Ollama website where it lists all of the different open source models. So I'm going to pull the Mistral model. I already have this downloaded, so now it's on my machine. And then if I wanted to use this model, I could type Ollama, run, and then Mistral, and then I can just start chatting with the model like I would in any other case. Now to leave, I can type /by, and that's great, and now we'll be able to use Ollama from our Python code. Again, I have an entire video in case you're confused or want more help that I'll leave on screen. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we're going to do is start setting up a basic API to use our LLM model. Now again, you can use any LLM that you want here. The important thing is that we just set up the API and we secure it properly. So for this video, the IDE that I'm going to be using is PyCharm. Now this is one of the best IDEs when it comes to working with Python, especially for things like APIs and dealing with frameworks like FastAPI, Django, or Flask, which we'll be using in this video. Now I have a long-term partnership with PyCharm, and if you guys want to get access to the professional edition with an extended free trial of up to 3 months, you can do that by clicking the link in the description. PyCharm has 2 versions, the community edition, which is completely free, and the professional edition, which you do need to pay for. But again, because you're a viewer of this channel, I can give it to you 3 months for free, so you can try it out and see if you like it. It has all kinds of great features, and we can actually test our API directly from the IDE, which makes our life a lot easier, and you'll see that in this video. Again, links in the description. So first things first, we're just going to set up the dependencies for our Python project to build this API. So I'm going to make a new file. I just opened a folder here in this IDE. So I went up here and I just opened a folder. I called it API for LLM. And then from here, I'm going to go new file. And then I'm going to call this requirements.txt. Okay, from this requirements.txt file, I'm just going to specify the dependencies that I'll need for my Python project. And obviously you need Python installed in order to follow along with the rest of these steps. So I'm going to install FastAPI, UVcorn, Ollama, python-.env, and then requests. Okay, now FastAPI is what we'll use for building our API. It'll be very simple, don't worry. UVcorn is for running our FastAPI application. Ollama is for interfacing with Ollama to use a local LLM. And then python.env is for loading in an environment variable file. And requests is for sending a request when we later test our API. Now we've specified these in our requirements.txt. So the next step is to simply install them. So what we're going to do is just open up a new terminal instance. I just have one here, and make sure it's in the same folder where your requirements.txt file is. If you're opening the terminal from an IDE or an editor, then it should just already be in the correct directory. From here, assuming we have Python installed, we're going to type pip install -r and then requirements.txt. Now this is just going to install all of the dependencies into our main Python installation. If you want, you can use a virtual environment, but I'm not going to cover that in the name of time. If that command doesn't work, you can try pip3 install -r requirements.txt, and what this does is install all of the dependencies from the requirements file. Now that we have all of that installed, we can start writing some simple code and get an API up and running. So what I'm going to do is make a new file, and it's going to be a Python file, and I'm just going to call this main.py. You can call it anything you want, but I recommend naming it main just to stick with the kind of conventions I'm using in this tutorial. It'll be a little bit easier to follow along with. Okay, so from here, we're going to make a very simple API. And to do that, we're going to say from FastAPI, import, and then FastAPI. And then we're going to import Ollama. Okay, then we're going to make an app. So we're going to say app is equal to FastAPI, and we're going to define an endpoint. An endpoint is just a URL on this server that we can access. So for now, we're going to say @app.post, and we're going to do /generate. Now you can call this anything that you want, but what this specifies is that you need to send a post request, which is a type of HTTP request, to this URL, and then the function that we write, which will be called generate, will run whenever we go to this /generate route. Now inside of here, we're going to take a prompt, which is a string, and what this specifies is that you need to pass a query parameter, which looks like this. Prompt is equal to, and then whatever the prompt is, whenever you want to call this route, so we know what the prompt to the LLM should be. From here, we can generate a simple response by saying response is equal to ollama.chat. From the chat, we're going to say the model is equal to whatever model we pulled and we want to use. In this case, it's Mistral. Then we're going to say messages is equal to, we're going to specify a list, and we're going to put a Python dictionary. In the Python dictionary, we need to specify the role as user and then the content as the prompt. Okay, so you can pass multiple messages here, but if you just want to pass one, then you just do it like this. And obviously you can modify the call to the LLM, but I'm just keeping it basic for right now. After here, we're going to return the response. And the way we'll do this is we'll return a Python dictionary that has response, and then the response, and this is going to be the message and the content, just so that we strip out the information that we actually want. So that's literally it. We're saying, okay, we want to chat with Ollama. This works because we've downloaded on our machine. We specify the model we want to use, the messages that we want to pass. You could also pass a system message if you wanted to customize the prompt or something. And then you can have a response. So we say response, message, content. Okay, now we need to run the API. So to run the API, we can open up our terminal and make sure, again, you're in the same directory where your Python script is. And you can type UVcorn and then main :app -- reload. Now, what these variables are right here, main is the name of my file, so main.py, and then app is the name of my FastAPI application, so app. So if you've changed either of those, you need to adjust these right here, and the -- reload will run this in development mode, so we'll reload the server anytime any changes are made. So if I hit enter here, you can see that now the API is running. It tells us what port it's running on, so port 8000 on localhost, and now we need to test it. Now there's various ways to test the API, but if you're working inside of PyCharm, then you can open up this Endpoints tab. You can find it by clicking on these three dots and look for it here, or you can see kind of a circle inside of a half circle. From here, you're going to specify the main.app package, okay? You're going to press the /generate so it can automatically actually read the endpoint. And then what you can do is see the kind of sample request right here. So you can see it says post localhost port 8000 /generate, and then you'll need to add this query parameter, prompt equal to, and then whatever you want to prompt the LLM with. Once you do that, you can hit submit request. You can wait for this to run. It will take a second, and then you can see the response right here. So let me just make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can read this, and you can see that we get the response from the LLM. It says, hello world, it's a classic example, blah, 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 and you can use it as you see fit. Now, other than that, the easiest way to test this if you're not using something like PyCharm is to download a tool called Postman. So I'm just going to open it up right here. This is a free tool that you can download on your computer, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever, that allows you to test your APIs really easily. So if you don't have familiarity testing them, simply download and install this tool and then open it up, and I'll show you how to use it. So assuming our API is still running in our terminal, we can open up the Postman application. From here, we can press this little plus button. You might need to make an account, or it might ask you for some stuff. You don't need to, but just get into this workspace, press on plus, and then what you're going to do is change get here to say post, because we're sending a post request. From here, you're going to type in the URL. So http://localhost/generate. Okay, and we need to make sure this is port 8000. So sorry, localhost port 8000 /generate prompt is equal to whatever you want to prompt. So something like hello world. And then what we can do is we can press on send. Postman will automatically send the request for us. Again, you just need to make sure you have a URL that looks like this. When we do this, you can then see that we get the response back from the LLM. Okay, so now we've written a basic LLM, but we want to make this secure. We want to add some kind of authorization, or at least some logic, so that not anyone can just use this. So what I'm going to do now is adjust this code so that only someone that has access to our function or to our API will be able to use the LLM. Because after all, that's the entire point of this. We don't want to let just a random person use the LLM. We want to maybe control their access. Okay, so now let's add our own version of an API key. Now, this is a key that someone will need to send to our backend server if they want to utilize the API. Now, what we can do with this key is we can just give it to certain users, or we can generate it however we want in any way that we see fit, and we can have some kind of value attached to this key to limit the number of requests that someone could send. So for example, any API key that I give to someone, maybe it only has a limit of 10. So after you've used the key 10 times, maybe you need to pay more money, or you need to wait a day or something like that before you could use the key again. I'm going to set up some basic logic, but it will give you a sense of how to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a few things. So from FastAPI, I'm going to import depends, HTTP exception, and header. Okay, I'm then going to import OS, and I'm going to say from .env import load.env. Now I'm going to call the load.env function, and what this is going to do is load a value from our environment variable file, which I'm going to create right now. So inside of our directory, we're going to make a new file, and we're going to call this .env. Okay, inside of here, we're going to say API underscore key is equal to, and then we can set this to some secret key that we would only give people that we want to have access to our API in order to use the LLM. Now, you could have as many API keys as you want, and typically you would generate these for users. So when people have an account, they would sign in, and then you could issue them an API key, and they would need to use that API key to access the API. That's a more advanced topic, and I'll leave a video on screen that shows exactly how to do that, but you'll get the idea with what I show you right here. So in this .env file, we've specified a variable called secret key. Now what we're going to do is we're going to load in that value. So we're going to say API underscore keys is equal to a list, or sorry, is equal to a set. And inside of here, we're going to say os.getEnv, and then the API underscore key. Now this works because we've loaded in the environment variable file, and now we can get that environment variable, and we put that in our list of valid API keys. And if we wanted to, we could associate this with a value like 10, and then we could subtract from this value anytime someone uses the API and treat this as like their credits. So I can say, this key has 5 credits remaining, so we could change this to API key credits or something. And you know what, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now that we've done that, we're going to write a simple function that will verify that a user has an API key before we allow them to continue. So I'm going to say define verify underscore API underscore key, and we're going to specify x underscore API underscore key. We're going to say this is a string, and this is equal to header, and then none. Okay, now what this is going to do is it's going to look in the headers of our request, which I'll show you in 1 second, for a variable called xAPI key. If it finds it, it's going to associate it with this parameter right here, and then allow us to read it in and use it inside of this, function. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to say credits is equal to API key credits dot get xAPI key. Now we're going to specify the default value is 0, and what this means is that we're going to attempt to get whatever the number of credits are associated with our API key, but if that API key doesn't exist, then we're just going to get 0. Then we're simply going to check if the credits are equal to 0. So we're going to say if the credits are less than or equal to 0, then what we're going to do is we're going to raise an HTTP exception, and we're going to say status 401, and then we're going to say invalid API key or no credits. Okay, just telling them, hey, you don't have any credits left, or your API key is expired. Or actually from here, we can just return the xAPI key. So if they do have a valid key, we can return it so we can use it later on. And then inside of here, we're going to make sure that they have an API key and that it's valid before we allow them to use this function. So to do that, inside of the parameters, we're going to add x underscore API key. We're going to say this is type string, and this is equal to depends on verify API key. Now just let me use this variable and then it will light up so you can read it easier. But what this means is that we're depending on this function call, and then if this function call raises an error, we'll just won't do anything inside of here. Whereas if it returns the API key, then we're good to go and we'll enter this function. So inside of here, the first thing we're going to do is just subtract our credits. So we're going to say API key credits at x API key, and then we're just going to say minus equals 1. So we're just going to subtract 1 from that to specify, hey, we're removing one of your credits because now you've successfully used this function. And that's it. That's literally all that we need. And now we've added kind of control to this API where you can only use this if you pass us an API key. Now again, we've just hard-coded an API key here from our environment variable file, but you could dynamically generate these however you wanted to, and you can handle them for various users. So I'm showing you the logic, but obviously you would need to go a step further with this to have correct authentication and authorization for a larger scale app. So now that we've done this, we want to test the authorized API. So we should be able to rerun this. So here it looks like it was rerunning, but I'm just going to shut it down and restart it to make sure it loads in the environment variable. So same thing, uvicorn main app reload. So now to test the API, again, there's multiple ways to do that, but I'm just going to use Postman so that it's universally available for all of you. And I'm going to keep the same request that I had last time, except this time I'm going to go into headers. Now inside of headers here, I'm just going to add the header for my API key. So I'm going to add the header of x underscore API underscore key like that. I believe that's what we called it. And then for the value, I'm going to say secret key. Okay. All right. So a silly mistake here, but actually we want to use hyphens when we specify this in the header, not underscores. So just x dash API dash key, and then put the value secret key. You don't need any quotes. And now when we send this, you should see that it works. It just takes a second and then we get the response back. And if we try to do this now 5 times, let's just keep doing it so that our credits go lower and lower. You should see eventually when we get to the 5th request that it doesn't work and it tells us that we run out of tokens. And you can see that's what we get. It says invalid API key or no credits. So there you go. We've now built an authenticated API that allows us to utilize our LLM with this API key. Now, again, you want to manage these keys correctly. There's a lot of other logic and things you can do, and I will leave a video on screen that will help you do that. Now, beyond that, I'm quickly just going to show you a Python script that you can use if you wanted to test the API from Python code. So I'm just going to make a script called test API. Now, what I'm going to do is just copy in some code. So here is the code. You can see that I import requests. I import the code to load my environment variable file. I specify the URL that I want to send my request to and the prompt that I want to pass to the LLM. I then specify my headers. So I have my API key, which is equal to what I'm loading from the environment variable file, content type application JSON, send a post request with my URL and my headers, and then I print out the response.json. Now I just restarted my server. I took a quick cut. So when I restarted the server, it will reset the amount of credits that I have. And now if I run this file, just takes a second and we should see that we get our response, and we do. You can see that I get the response back from the LLM. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to show you in this video. I know there was a lot, but I wanted to explain how you set up a simple API with this API token, which you can then use to control access to the LLM. The LLM call here can be anything that you want, but it's important that you do gate it and you do control it from a backend server so that front-end users can't directly access your tokens. Now you may be asking, well, what about this token right here? The whole point of this token is that you control this token rather than OpenAI or DeepSeek or something like that. So now if you want to invalidate the token, if you want to have a certain number of credits, if you only want to give it to premium users or paid users, you can do that, right? You can control how you want to issue this token. But if you just use an OpenAI token, now anyone that has access to that can go and utilize OpenAI and cost you a ton of money. So that's why you want to set up this own kind of custom backend where you have full control as the developer and the app owner. I will leave this code in the description in case you want to check it out. It will be available from GitHub. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.